I did the interview with Lewis. And I'll show you the thing that we did. It was actually really fun. We did it at the Chinese Garden. Um, but the way he talked about it, I don't know how much of his backstory you knew. He got into music in like high school. I guess whatever Chinese high school was, maybe even middle school technically. And he picked up instruments and he started teaching music, and like so even earlier on, like he was pretty supported for what it was, traditional Chinese music. And I was like, I didn't think that that was a thing, but now I'm thinking about it. Yeah, it was a thing. There were Chinese music is a pretty key part of some people's lives. It's not as crazy as others. So I guess does that count as a classical music, even though it's not Western?
That's a that's a musicological question that I feel is. What do you mean? Does it count?
Well, so from the same level of respect, I guess, from the level of respect, level of people who treat it as a career,
In China,
education.
not so much.
Okay.
I mean, and my one good data point is yeah, I think things have changed a little bit, but I noticed, because of my being a university professor at the time, um, 2005 maybe, I went to Shanghai, and I managed to have made contact with Dai Xiaolian, who's a Guqin professor at Shanghai Music Conservatory. And so, well, I had something that was dear to my heart that I wanted to go talk to her about because she had gone to Europe, to Leiden in the Netherlands, to see what they had left of Robert van Gulik, who was a Guqin player, as well as the famous Dutch murder mystery writer of the Judge D set in the Tang Dynasty series.
Wait, this is somebody that lived in. Where does he live? Or where did he live?
He, I'm not sure when he died. He's been dead for a long time. He was, I think he was going to university right after World War One. He was born in Indonesia,
Oh, okay.
so he was part of the Dutch Indonesia thing, and then he got a dual PhD in Japanese and Chinese. Ended up in the Chinese legation in Chongqing in World War II, where he obviously couldn't go home. Think about that. And he finished off his career as the Dutch ambassador to Japan. So, but he was a Guqin player, and he wrote two books in English on the Guqin. One is called The Lore of the Lute, which is a let's just say it's a bad translation for Qin. And the other one is a translation of a poem from Xikang about 250 A.D. This is a long poem about the Guqin that Van Gulik was a fabulous sinologist. So anyway, so she went there to look for his papers, and she found some Chinpo that the rest of the world, Guqin handbooks, that the rest of the world didn't know about, that Van Gulik had collected while in China, and she wrote a paper about it. I got lucky enough to find the paper and read it, and then and since I was also in a sort of Van Gulik diaspora, you didn't even ask me a question, but the short version is, I played classical guitar. I moved to Taiwan because I was studying Chinese. When I got there, somebody suggested I take up the Guqin. That person's name is John Thompson. I'm going to make a little joke and say he's the famous North American Guqin player, and I'm the unknown North American Guqin player. But in point of fact, we were roommates, and he got me started. So, sort of 30 years later, I go to see Dai Xiaolian, and we sat down and we had a nice talk about Van Gulik and what she had found and what I had found, because when I was in Taiwan, I had started with help to try to translate a book that was written in 1850 or so in Fujian partially about how to make guqin. And so I took her a copy of that because it turned out that nobody in China actually had any copies of said book, but Van Gulik had, and he had left a copy at the Library of Congress. So I got a microfilm from the Library of Congress, actually. And so that's sort of how, Van Gulik it was curious because you find these touches of him in unexpected places, and that was an example. Like, for example, there's a guqin in the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. I grew up in Kansas. I remember seeing this instrument quite early, and I had no idea that I would end up playing it. But it's a Japanese guqin.
Wait, it's a guqin, so it's the same instrument, not a koto, not any.
Same instrument. It was made in Japan in the early 1800s.
Did they play guqin in Japan?
Off and on, people played guqin in Japan. It's like it never stuck. Somebody would decide it was a great thing and maybe have some students, and then it just sort of just washes out of Japanese culture.
Do you know the etymology? What is it? The actual history of the guqin itself? I guess it's spread in the world, because obviously it started in China. It's a Chinese classical instrument.
Yes. So are you referring to ancient times in China or modern times now? Or?
No, there's been dynasties, and the dynasties all did stuff.
Well, the short version, if we take Chinese history and pardon the 5,000-year people, we'll cut it down to 3,000 years. Well, we can call the first period more or less the Zhou dynasty with some violence. And the second would, be, say, the end of the Han on to the beginning of the Sung, and then Sung on. Okay. The last period is amazing because we have written music, maybe 100 books, maybe 1,000 pieces, and we only play about 10% of them. And that has sort of caused a kind of field day in modern times of guqin players trying to reconstruct truly ancient music that, for want of whatever, fell out of fashion, basically didn't get played. And if you go back to the previous period of time, we have some pieces in an old book from 1425 that might be getting into that Tang period, maybe, but we don't really know. We have one written piece of music that was discovered in Japan, and it's so strange that I view it as an act of senility when people sit down to try to recreate it, because it doesn't tie in with the performance practice of sung on, as far as we can tell. And then if you go back to that poem I was talking about, the Shikong poem, which is about 250 AD, or CE, excuse me. That piece seems to have we have a full-blown guqin. From his description of it, that seems to be, the guqin of now, okay? But that's the far end of the Han Dynasty, overlapped a little bit. And there's a little bit of writing at the end of the Han Dynasty. A qin player named Cai Yong, who's relatively famous, and his daughter Cai Wenji, who everyone in China has heard of because of the 18 Barbarian Pipes poem or something like that she wrote. And her story, personal story, but never mind. But when you get back into the Zhou period, we have the term, but we seem to have a different performance practice where it seems to have been used in ensemble situations along the lines of, with the sub, let's say, a guzheng,
Is the guzheng older or guqin older as far as an instrument?
They're probably more or less choppable.
Okay.
The
And so
same.
basically, when they're making instruments, they're like, well, this one's gonna have a more of a quiet sound, this type of playing style, and the other one is more like a hammering.
Maybe, but you're guessing.
Yeah, yeah.
And the problem with the guzheng, to some extent, for that old, is if you dig a guzheng up out of a grave, you're probably going to know what it is. You dig a guzheng out of a grave, it doesn't look like that.
Alright.
And there's the 13 mother of pearl markers, which have an amazing mathematical function.
Yeah.
They don't have them.
They didn't have it back
You
then.
know, so that the first extremely important period of Chinese ancient culture is, it's just, we know it existed, but we really don't know much about it. And archaeology has not been very helpful.
Sure. Yeah.
But now in modern times, I think actually the Guqin group on Facebook is interesting because you see pressure there for people in Europe, the United States, Brazil. Brazil now has a Guqin group.
Brazil's got a pretty big Asian Chinese population, right?
Yeah, I think so. So there's signs of life, and it's kind of I have a warped, because I am a Guqin player. I have a warped perspective, which is like, if, forgive me for saying this, but if the piano, what I was going to say about the Shanghai Conservatory was, I got the distinct impression, because I was a professor at a university too, that you could pretty much judge professors, their university status, by seeing where their office is and what their office looks like. And it was pretty obvious that if you were a musician and you played violin or piano, you had a better office than if you played a classical Chinese musical instrument of some. And they probably made the guy playing the erhu sit outside. That's a joke. I don't know that.
No, you don't. You can't. We can research that.
We can
find out
research
about
that.
it. There'll be like a picture of a person sitting outside with an erhu. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's.
So it's just if pianos and guitars can be so damn popular in China, the rest of the world can appreciate the Guqin. That's my perspective.
I can appreciate that. Also, this would be a good point to actually, let's focus in on sort of you as the Guqin, the what was your term for between your friend John
Crank.
Thompson? The least known Guqin player in the U.S.
Well, compared to John.
Compared to John, okay. Can I ask this first? This was an interesting question that the director at this music nonprofit asks people that I didn't realize until you brought it up for the podcast end of what we're trying to do. What he asks is just straight up, and you can feel free to answer however you like. What is your first memory?
Of anything? My first memory.
You can take that however you like. It's not time specific.
Well, I'm going to warp it and make it Guqin oriented. So, my first memory is my wife and I had acquired a roommate, and the roommate, being John Thompson, showed up, and he discovered I was playing guzheng, and because I played classical guitar. I wanted to learn how to play a Chinese musical instrument. I thought it would be interesting. It has to be a stringed instrument, though, because I was a guitar player, and so I went off and started taking lessons from a fellow named Yan Zaiping. And if you were a little older and had some Taiwan background, you'd realize that he was a famous guzheng player. Although, what did I know? I was introduced to the guy via a musicologist in the U.S. that somehow I was acquainted with. And John shows up and takes out a guzheng and puts it on his lap and starts playing and said, "Jim, as a guitar player, classical guitar player, I really think you should be playing this instrument." And I have a possible false memory because it's funny, but I think he said, "Jim, the guzheng is for girls. The guzheng is for boys." That may be a false memory. He may not have said that. There's no telling. He's old. He's older than me, so who knows? He's still out there. He mostly lives in New York. So that's it.
Nice, great. That okay. So let's go back to not your first memory period, but then maybe your earliest. How did you get into music originally?
My sister was possibly the least famous professional folk singer.
There's a lot of least famous people in your life. That's.
But I mean, that was quite inspiring to me. She had a really good soprano voice, and it was just a very clean singing voice without any frou-fra of any sort. She didn't have a hook. And she strummed guitar. She knew her standard 3 chords per song, and knew more than one strum. So I think at some point she gave me some guitar lessons too. But that's how. And she was 10 years older than I am, and she played Irish folk music. And I think genetically we might be like 5% Irish, but oh well. That was the deal, because she was. Those were the days of Hootenanny and Peter, Paul, and Mary, and that sort of thing.
Oh, so then your background is what's your background as far as a person? It doesn't have to be ethnicity, it doesn't have to be nationality, but I guess you grew up in.
Well, I grew up in Kansas, but for some reason, my musical experiences were basically rock and roll, courtesy of the 60s. In 68, I spent the Summer of Love in San Francisco. Yeah, in 68, I heard 1,000 bands, just during all of that period. So the Guitar Hero notion is burned pretty well into my brain. I saw some.
How old were you in 68?
18.
And you were in San Francisco as just traveling to
As somebody who was not going to college for the summer. And not working either.
So you just went around watching live music. Did you already play music at the time? Guitar?
Yeah, I played guitar. But, it was an acoustic guitar, and I would have sold my left kidney for an electric probably.
And so at the time, did you play in a band or anything, or just yourself?
I played in several really bad bands later, a few years later.
Were you inspired because of the Guitar Hero? So you wanted to be a Guitar Hero?
Yeah, sure, I did. I mean, one of the most awesome things I have ever seen in my life was a Buddy Guy gig, and it blows my mind that he's still out there. But he broke his high E string in the middle of it, and didn't matter. I would have cried or something. I don't know. Later on, I was privileged to see a B.B. King video where B.B. King actually changed the string during the song.
That's one of my favorite videos. Because the guy comes out and he's still singing. I mean, it helps that he doesn't have to strum while he's singing, but yeah.
Well, Buddy Guy played like 14 solos with 5 strings. I mean, it turned. Later on, I realized that he was one of those guitar players who's totally awesome at playing a melody on a single string. So
it helps you have that nice access on the Strat. You can play all the way up to the top.
Yeah. So I don't know. Does that answer?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. This is.
Okay.
It's so basically that kind of paints a picture of where you're from and sort of how you kind of got into music. Well, then how did you get into Chinese music? Because you said you already started playing guzheng before you played the chin.
Well, I got into Chinese music. Well, you have to understand, when I went to Taiwan, I had a useless bachelor's degree in anthropology and Chinese literature. So I'd had 4 years of Chinese and some sounds under my belt in college.
How did that come up as far as your interest in Chinese culture?
It came up because a guy, it came up because this fellow who was really an old China hand, who was he was the chair of the East Asian Language Department at KU, University of Kansas, because probably nobody else wanted to do it, and he didn't really have academic chops. He was just there because he had hung out with some warlords in the 30s as a newspaper reporter, and had actually finally gotten around about writing a giant book about one, which was a cool book. But he smiled at me, and I was a language was a requirement. I had tried to take Russian. You're gonna love this. I had decided that Russian was just too damn bonkers for me. And there was another friend who had taken a semester of Mandarin, and he said, try Mandarin. So when I found this guy, whose name was Robert Burton, believe it or not, he said, oh, sure, you should take Chinese. It'll be fabulous. He told me one of his 50 million stories. I don't remember what it was. But I was so blown away by the whole thing that I signed up for first year Chinese.
Well, so you were learning language. You got into, I guess that you basically decided to start to study Mandarin, and then you said you already started playing the guzheng sort of
In Taiwan.
For fun.
Yeah, because I wanted to. I played guitar, so I wanted to try.
And this is after you've been in bands?
A stringed instrument.
This is after you've already been in bands and you've already had the experience of playing in a group. But it's just part of the thing is like community. What does it mean to have a community ensemble? A band is a community, so I think that's one way of looking at it versus it being like, well, I'm part of like a church choir or a
sure
thing. So you already had some experience with the idea of a music community.
Yeah.
I guess your family too.
But there was no community for my year and a half in Taiwan. I just basically was taking private guzheng lessons from a fellow who was a 1949 year refugee from Shanghai, and I think he was actually a good teacher. And I took lessons from him like once a week for a year and a half, and then when we came back to the U.S., I went to UW, and I continued lessons there with a fellow who had been brought over from Taipei, actually. His name was Tao Jusheng. And he actually, this is ironical, I want to mention this. The most popular guzheng video on YouTube is by my teacher. I have no idea why it's there, but it's there. It was taken in the 80s by a musicologist named Robert Garfias at UW. And, he's there. I'm not sure. He's wearing a suit or a tux and playing this beautiful chin with silk strings. And it's been there so long, it's got more hits than anything else. I like that. But so anyway, when I was in Taiwan, the other thing that happened was I took guzheng making lessons with John Thompson. He and I, both as students, went off to study how to make guzheng with this fellow who eventually was deemed a famous painter, strangely enough. Yeshu Chang, that was his name. And when I came back, I tried to make a couple. And I actually still have one downstairs, strangely enough, from that era. And then, I did whatever I did musically. I basically played in a synth band in Portland in the 80s.
So you came back so you moved to Portland after you were in Asia, and then you came to Portland.
More or less. If we leave out UW and Washington State. But I actually played in a band in Washington State, by the way, as a guitar player.
So then, at that point, you had the Chinese music influence, but you were still playing Western music when you came back, and you did the Guitar Hero rock and roll.
Sort of, but it was a synth band, and we were not very good.
But you had the experience.
For what it's worth, we made an album called Dumpster. Do not play in or around.
Have you heard the music?
And
we got to dig this up. I gotta. This is going in the museum. This is part of the history of it. So actually, the part of what this is going to be is also capturing like digital archival like images, and then if you have like an old CD and anything like old music, we wanna have this stored in the museum because this is for the children.
Okay.
So you were in the band, you had an album, and this was in Portland in the 80s?
In the 80s.
In the 80s. And then so what did you do as far as like, you know, career and professional life?
I was a programmer because I graduated with a master's in CS in Washington State.
So the music was more of just hobby for you guys?
Well, nearly everyone, with some exception, in the synth band were either Tektronix or Intel people. So I think we did that to stay sane.
And how long did this go on for?
A few years. We're still friends. We still stay in touch. One of us is even a relatively famous synth band person in Portland for a band called Motrik, if you should ever hear them, Motrik. They claim they're krautrock, or kraut, I don't know, kraut, yeah, something like that.
Nice. Well, so then how long did it take before you got back into Chinese music? Well, you were making Chin at the time. You kind of.
I started making Chin maybe in the late 90s. Seriously, I had taken a stab at it. Well, see, John Thompson showed up again in my life, courtesy of the internet, and basically said, Jim, you produced this typewritten manuscript way back there on the Yupijai Chimpu part of it, you know, but you never published it. Why didn't you publish it? So then I did. And it's sort of my Chinese music thing is John Thompson has always been there sort of, yeah, more than once. So that sort of got me started making them. And in modern times. And the short version of that is I'm in my teens in how many I've made, and I have sold half of them. And somehow I decided that it made no sense for me, because I was never going to be making hundreds of them, to make guqin that were exactly like all of the black guqin in China. Plus there's a little problem of, in some ways, you can't get Chinese lacquer, you can get Japanese lacquer, and it's just as good. So, but I just decided I wanted to use North American Pacific Northwest woods, and I wanted to figure out how to show the wood. And that's a problem with the way the guqin is designed, because whoever the genius is who decided to, because you know the guqin is basically an instrument that should have a fingerboard but doesn't. The soundboard and the fingerboard are the same thing. And to us guitarists, that means something. Okay. So the problem with having the fingerboard there is if you're going to try to, they're guqin that are 1,300 years old. So they've been having this for 1,300 years. This abrasion, constant abrasion. And that's over 1,300 years. That's going to wear a man down. So I decided, well, I'm pushing 70. I'm not going to live that long when it gets down to it. So I'll just try to figure out how to do a clear finish of some sort. And I've suffered for that. You have no idea. In more ways than one. But I think at this point I've pretty much got something figured out. It took a while.
So in the late 90s you were already making...
I was starting to
make this. Is that also
I was making bad chin.
Is that also
Slowly.
when you joined up with the Portland Chinese music scene as far as the...
How the heck did that come about?
Well, this was definitely way after Beehive, right? I mean, way before Beehive.
It's before Beehive. Dr. Yang sort of found out about me somehow and showed up. Actually, I think there were 5 people, maybe it included you. They all sat over there. I think it was Lewis, his wife, Dr. Yang, maybe you. You weren't there? Okay.
Because you came, I remember you actually showed up way later. I can't even see this. I remember you showed up at least a year or two later after you were, I already know you from the Chinese Garden.
Sure.
But okay,
so he sort of showed up here in some weird way to interview me. And then Um, he decided I passed. So
Did you have to audition?
it's hard to say what that was. Was it an audition? Was it a social encounter? I don't know. But then just to sort of talk about that stuff, I mean, after that, I started playing usually once a week. And I, I very much, I'm not sure who else enjoyed it, but I enjoyed my time playing upstairs with him. I loved that.
Oh, I gotta get swing.
Eventually.
There's Beehigh right there. He's gonna get an interview later.
And in fact, we even came up. Guqin is an instrument that, in some sense, resists being in an ensemble position. It's always been, this instrument has possibly the greatest solo musical instrument tradition on the planet. I mean, we have a piece of music from 500 AD. So it's just, even if nobody can agree on what that music actually, how it should be interpreted. By the way, you can quote me on that. It'd be nice if it was a simple piece. It's not a simple piece, of course, but in any case, it's the main thing most thing that has actually happened with the Guqin historically is it would be played with a kind of xiao, and that was about it. All right, except in classical court traditional music, which is a different kettle of fish, where you might have 15 Guqin players all standing up and only playing open strings. Okay, so they play so la do, and that was about the whole thing. So anyway, at the garden we had this thing going on for a while upstairs where Beehigh would play and I would play. And Beehigh and I decided at some point to try to play a little bit together, which we did. And Dr. Yang would sit off at the side and do calligraphy. And then other stuff happened, which was I got this bee in my bonnet about having a musical happening here, a house concert, because I had played in a house concert with a friend of mine who plays Vina over in Beaverton. So it was about half Vina, half Chin. And I had my Guqin students of the time and some, and this woman who has a million students, and we played at her house, and that was kind of fun. It was kind of fun to do that. So I decided to try it here. And the people who were invited were Beehigh.
And the Japanese koto player.
And Mitsuki Dazai. Who David Dahl knew, so we were invited her, and David, who was expected to hold up the Vietnamese side of the whole thing, yeah. He played Dan Tran and Dan Bao. And Yi Xian Qian.
Du Xianqin.
Sort of.
Yeah, do you want to sit there? I want to include this. I think this is a good way for me to actually introduce.
This is my shifu. Shifu.
Yes.
Shifu means master.
So Dr. Yang played Jinghu, I think.
Here, yeah. Beijing Opera. Ye Shenchen.
He played Guzheng. Reza played, Mitsuki played. Mitsuki blew my mind because she's in there, but she's about this far away from me, and she did the thing which I'd never seen before, of the koto player slapping the bridge in the middle of the piece to change the tuning, and I was just,
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that's very impressive.
mind-boggling. And then later on, just one other little ensemble thing to mention is that Mitsuki got a bee in her bonnet that she and I should play in a concert, so we did that last year. And then we did the strangest thing I've ever done in my whole life, which was 3 people playing Yangguan Sandia, Yang Past 3 variations. And David played, because David knows that piece, having played it on Arhu. And Mitski basically just played little trills over. Once I explained to her what the tuning was, she just played these little things. The hardest musical position I've ever been in my life was, I realized I was sort of a continuo, the ground bass for the other two. So I'm sorry, I'm the rhythm. I can't fuck up. Sorry about my English accent. But in any case, I wanted to listen to her, what she was doing on top of this piece, but I couldn't. It was very hard. But it was fun. So who knows?
You didn't rehearse before.
She didn't have time.
Oh, okay.
David insisted on rehearsing too much.
Just improvise.
So then this is not. I guess the Portland ensemble that I'm featuring right now is the Bamboo and the Dr. Young Orchestra. Basically, it's Dr. Young, Lewis, and Henry, right? Like that was
Henry
the
bamboo flute.
That was the core of that version of the group. But then you guys play with other musicians all the time. You all joined various different groups, like you're saying in this case, and you Beehive when you started playing. You just mainly play the guzheng.
I play guzheng. Yeah.
Okay. You're also a drummer, apparently.
Drum. Play a little bit percussion thing.
I told him.
We're like talking. If we're jamming today, you gotta get on the drum set. Yeah, but like, so you guys played together as a community, but not necessarily as one group or individual.
Right, sure.
And is that the Portland Chinese music scene?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Do you feel like it's keeping the community alive right now? Is there enough interest in people playing that it's keeping it actually alive?
Well, as a Guqin player, I would argue that Guqin players would be the last to know, because we're sort of cave dwelling troglodytes by definition.
How many Guqin players are there around?
Around here?
Yeah.
If there are any, they're only my students.
Wait, Beehive, how come you did not play? I remember you told me this. You actually gave me an answer that was very funny, that I always thought about. But why do you play Guqin? I mean, is it Guzheng rather than Guqin?
I was in children's choir when I was like 9 years old, and one day the teacher brought guzheng and showed guzheng for us. I was just I said, wow, it sounds so beautiful, and I asked my parents, started learning that. I have no choice. Maybe if I saw Guqin first, sounds good, I'll learn it.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of, why do I play guitar? Because of my sister. Why do I play Guqin? Because John Thompson telling, I may be making this up, but that's partially
destiny.
Yeah, destiny.
But this was actually
but also, just the simple thing is, due to synology. See this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's a Ranguk.
It's Ranguk. This is Shikong's poem.
Okay. Well, actually, what I remember Beehive telling me back in the day about, like, why you chose to play the guzheng and the Guqin. I think I just asked, I was like, you also played the Guqin. I think you were saying that the Guqin has more of like an elder, like an
more deeper.
I think you said the word long yet, not long.
No, it's more deep history and more how to explain.
I almost took it.
Like,
well, sorry. Yeah, do you have any other?
It's deep Chinese culture and philosophy, everything.
I almost took it as like you have to have an older hand. You have to have an older like spirit to play it. Like it's almost like young people would play more like like guzheng, which is like more like.
Well, it depends. I know some young people who love to play guzheng.
Okay.
Yeah, they love this sounds. You talk about Chinese culture, Qing Qi Shu Hua. I always. It's Qing, not guzheng, but originally, according to a legend story, this two guys are combined together at the very, very first, right? And Qing Se, Xiangzheng, and then separated to Qing and Zheng. Yeah, they're similar, quite similar.
The Qin Qi Shu Hua thing, do you need me to translate that?
Yeah,
琴
please.
书法
Well, qin is this.
Yes.
Okay, even if in modern Mandarin we say gu qin, because of any classical one syllable needs to be two syllables to understand. And qi is wei qi, go. Shu is calligraphy, hua is painting. There is an idea there of collaboration. And I think simply, if Dr. Yang was doing calligraphy and I was playing Chen sitting next to him, from traditional Chinese scholar point of view, that's an ensemble dude. It is. And the garden has tried at least once, and I thought I enjoyed it, to have a scholar yaji, which yaji is elegant meaning, literally. But the Guqian, what tends to happen is, my joke is this is done in order to torture Guqian students, but we'll have a Guqian yaji, we just call it a yaji. And I've done that in San Francisco, and we've attempted it a few times here, because there have been a couple of other Guqian players who had nothing to do with me. They just came that way, that have been here off and on.
Can you explain what yaji is?
A yaji is a get-together, in theory, of scholars to enjoy their art. So you can see a painting, say, from the Qing dynasty of some scholars sitting out somewhere, and maybe there's a chin. Perhaps the chin is in a bag. Perhaps it's better that way. I don't know. But maybe they're looking at paintings. Maybe somebody's doing calligraphy and they're admiring it. Maybe somebody is intoning a poem. So scholar arts, that sort of thing. And is that okay? Okay. So we would typically get together, and then everybody has to go around and play a piece. And if it's happened in the past when I went to London or New York, that there would be yaji, usually for me to say something about translating the Yugujai Chenpu, because people want to hear about that. But
Can I mention something?
Sure.
I'm interrupting. I think the most important place that people should be a zhiyin, someone who knows your music and love your music, yaji, and these guys all get together, appreciate it, and get together.
yeah,
That's very important. Zhiyin.
I think that's a good point, because of the idea of, we have this modern idea of memes, and so my little permanent joke is that Chinese scholar memes, they're a real thing. So it's like flowing water, as that which you see in Gaoshan Liushui, high mountain flowing water paintings. And the Guqian attempts to reproduce that. The Guzheng version actually has the idea of the meme.
Well, way later.
Well, that's actually
This idea.
that's your fault too for me, because that's why once I was clued into that, hearing you play Gaoshan Liushui is a good thing. I like that.
Yeah, I like that version too. Guqian version.
So,
But I like Guqi also.
I hope that makes some sense.
This is actually this what makes the idea of Chinese ensemble music and just all of these different aspects of it. And I talked to Dr. Aaron about like the four
I have something
scholarly
profound to
arts.
say though. Keep this in mind. The only profound thing I'm going to say.
Oh,
Sometimes ensembles aren't necessarily always music.
well, the whole idea of the scholarly arts and everything else, that's what Dr. Young was actually, he has kind of put that in my head too. I think it's interesting with ensembles, it's definitely more than just playing music. It's definitely more than just playing notes. It's like the creative aspect of it. And so like being in bands and having, seeing like Asian American kids learn music, it's not just going out and doing one thing. It's about building from it. And it's like people like who say like you can't just do music for a career. I think it's really important to have music in your life if you're musically inclined. I'm not saying that everybody should go out and start a band and play
Sure.
music, but I do feel like what you're describing is it makes it a lot more than just playing music for fun. There's a academic side to it. There's education from it. There's community building. There's all those other things, and that's one of the key research points for me, at least, to do this project, to find out about how music influenced musicians and how music influenced people who stopped playing music, who are now grown career people, but they come from a music background. They come from a music community. So it's really interesting to hear you guys talk about that. I think it makes this group extra important for us to document. I appreciate that. I mean, this is just like a preliminary. So the other thing for you guys to sort of know about this project is this is not just like an first interview, one interview, and that's it, and we walk away. We actually want to document what you guys are going to do in the next years. Basically, until this thing becomes an actual museum exhibit, I want to keep track of like, hey, are you still playing more music? What's your next chin gonna be, and all that, and we want to follow up on this. So it's like, this is a nice beginning. I want us to play music and hang out and like actually have that moment. But then I would like to also Behi, we're gonna visit your school, and part of, do you teach at Wisdom Arts? Yeah. Okay. So like Behi's whole thing is to teach the next generation, and you teach music too, but there's a whole school and there's an ensemble at the school, so I think we can explore that a lot more, and I would love to just kind of keep going with this.
Could I ask one thing?
Yeah.
Ask me about guqin making.
What do you have to say about guqin making?
I would like you to include some that I've made in your video. For example, the one that's right there, the brown one.
This one?
Yeah. It's new, and it's made out of old growth California redwood. For the
Not
primary
Polonia?
wood. No, it's a redwood. Man.
Redwood. Ooh.
And you understand when I say redwood, I don't mean homu.
Oh.
It's sequoia. You know, the giant trees in California.
I want to get some I just want to walk around later and just get some B-roll of just the house as long as we have the time for it. But I want to
this
get
one
more shots.
made 5 or 6 years ago was spruce and maple.
This is the one I think I touched before, like actually seeing. Wait, no, you had a. Did it get darker since then?
This one's on YouTube. Yeah, I doubt it, but who knows?
I remember there was one that was like very light colored.
There is a light colored one. It's one of my Frankensteins.
So what type of wood do you think it sounds better?
I like redwood. I like western red cedar. I don't have any western red cedar at the moment on me.
Have, I guess, scholarly Chinese musicians taken up on your whole school of thought?
I have a friend in San Francisco who bought one.
Are they like
Actually,
appreciating?
He's supposedly buying this one because he's a native Californian, and a Chinese music teacher, and the redwood idea is exciting for him, I think.
With the guzheng, would it have the same effect? Obviously, it would have different effect with different woods and.
Guzheng, the upper board and the board made of commonly made of polonium, very soft, good for resonation. I think other wood like head and tail, I think it's all can be a very varied.
Like Nandu.
Like homu, nanmu, nanmu, the good wood. Yeah.
Is that something that
depends?
People want to keep exploring.
Typically a hardwood.
Hardwood.
Literally.
I don't know what the economics for like making chins and selling it, like you were saying earlier, but like I don't know who's all out there exploring.
Polonium is a cheap wood.
But as far as like making new ones, like I know like with guitars now, like literally every model of guitar has like cocobolo as one of the woods, and like some new weird koa wood combo. Are they exploring that as much as it could be?
I think there's some of that, and I think it's relatively recent. If a person you might consider interviewing would be Carol Chang in L.A. She has, I think, one of the few music stores. She's an accomplished guzheng player and has played guzheng, and she has one of the few music stores, perhaps outside of Canada, that sells Chinese instruments.
You're talking about Fei Wang?
Carol.
Oh, Carol.
And I mean, she sells mostly guzheng, but she's actually an expert on that particular subject.
She's
Mostly
very
because she got
knowledgeable.
pissed off because there's this myth that, and I'm going to say this, this is horrifying, that the guqin and guzheng are made out of wutong. And when people say wutong, they typically mean what we call a Chinese parasol tree. It probably has that. Probably there's a mistake because in general nobody actually makes musical instruments out of wutong, out of the Chinese parasol tree. It just isn't done. If you go and look for guqin for sale in China on Taobao or something, or Carol, just look at Carol's site. You know, they're either Paulownia or another wood called shanmo, which is, the garden has one of those actually in the back behind the waterfall. It's a fir tree, but not wutong. But the problem is probably in North China, the wu and or the tong terms got used to describe Paulownia because wutong, the Fermiona simplex, is a tree of Guangdong, Guangxi, of the south. It likes warm and rain, both. You know, and the garden had one actually for a while, and it died. And I think that was just, cannot expect that kind of tree to be happy in Portland. Happy in San Francisco, but not here. So there's just, she was pissed because everybody was telling her that guzheng were made out of wutong, and she'd go to Hangzhou to do instrument buying trips and stuff like that, and just, she couldn't find anybody who actually ever made a guzheng out of wutong. There weren't any. Yeah, unless you think wutong means paotong.
Paotong.
Yeah, well that's just it. It's paotong or baitong if you're from Sichuan.
Sichuan or Henan? I don't know. Henan province.
Those are just local terms, but they're not Fermiona simplex. So I don't know. So come with me and let me show you a few other things.